I'm so thrilled to have the both of you here. We've talked a lot about the impact of the Bellingham tragedy and what that's had on pipeline safety. But as we've talked about, there's been many other tragedies before and since, including the 17 people who died in 2023, the most in a decade. So what do we continue to learn from these tragedies, and what do we still need to learn?
We still have a lot of work to do. I mean, here's the thing that, I was pretty struck by in the video where Carl talks about how Olympic Pipeline handed out Band-Aids and aspirin afterwards. I try when I talk about things to talk about a different sector. So that people, will listen a little bit more. But I will say, for the NTSB, we investigate tragedy. And so we arrive after something occurs that is terrible. But in the hours and days, and sometimes months, which turns into years, what always strikes me is how the entity who was responsible or part of that tragedy reacts and responds to it. I will say what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, was terrible. And I'm not just talking from a perspective, and this does, I think, inform pipeline operators. What Norfolk Southern did in that town was terrible. Not only did they not get information to the first responders, the volunteers didn't know what was on the cars. They didn't know how to respond. They had to have another volunteer firefighter who just happened to be the chemistry teacher, the high school chemistry teacher there to help them. They were too close to the fire, putting their lives in danger. They didn't know for hours. The chief, who ended up to be the incident commander, didn't get information until 2 a.m. This started at about 8 or 9 p.m., so it was hours. And then, to add insult to injury, over the course of days, Norfolk Southern basically said, there's nothing to see here. And then would show up and give comments to the community without taking a single question and listening. And so I was really struck by that. And 2 months later, there was a derailment in Raymond, Minnesota, BNSF. And BNSF, it was an ethanol train, and it was on fire. It was in the middle of the town. And within an hour, the president of BNSF came to the scene, went to the news conference, met with the community, went to the news conference, stood there with the governor and others and said, this is our responsibility. We're at fault. We're so sorry. We're going to make this right. And then went around and talked to the community. And what happened? We were there. I was there. And all of a sudden, the mayor and everybody in the community was bringing in food for them and everybody else, but it was a totally different response. And the community response, because of how they were respected and approached. I don't want to just put it on Norfolk Southern. I think, I think there were lots of failures for East Palestine. But it should inform, because I don't know how many more tragedies need to occur, what happens in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy. I mean, Tristan and I were in Jackson, Mississippi after a few Atmos explosions, and the entire community was devastated, had questions. They were angry, rightfully, and they didn't feel like their questions were being answered. The firefighters were taking in calls, hundreds of calls, for over a year, and didn't know what to do. So I have to say, when I think about tragedy and tragedy, yes, we have to prevent them from occurring. But what happens in the immediate aftermath? You know, how do you treat a community? I mean, don't wait till then. It's talking with the community, educating, having conversations, working with the fire service, working with the community before you get to that, because you might. But then what happens afterwards? So that's the thing that I always think about.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we saw a lot of parallels to that in lots of pipeline failures and tragedies, but in the Satartia, the Denbury failure in Satartia, there was no communication to the first responders there, and they didn't know what they were dealing with, and they figured out that they had to put on scuba gear to rescue people without any direction. So we see it in the pipeline space. How about you, Tristan?
I think in the last 4 years, I've met a lot of very prideful people in the pipeline industry, and they're prideful about the improvements they've made in their redundancies in terms of safety. You know, there's a lot of pride, but not after an incident. There's a lot of humility after an incident. And it's been, you know, we respond oftentimes along with the NTSB to incidents, a lot of them, all over the country, small, medium, large, and tragic. And there's it's hard to see the pride in the wake of an incident, but you do see it sometimes because companies will say, well, you know, it actually, you know, we were doing everything we thought was right, and you know, there's still, you can still detect the pride sometimes in what, certainly in East Palestine, right? Or, you know, Olympic Pipeline handing out, what was it, aspirin pills?
Band-Aids.
You know, that is a time for, I think the message I have underscored, especially the last couple of years in every meeting, I saw Joe with the Canadian Energy Regulator, when we were up in Calgary a few months ago, is the humility is good for all time. It is to know that at any time there is something you might not have known. And the CEO of Freeport Energy, you know, confided that, you know, they had a perfect, in 10 years, not a single work injury on the job. And they were very confident in their safety until their facility blew up, and they didn't know why. And you know, you can do everything right and get except one thing and have a major failure. That is always going to be the case unless you've constantly, you know, employ the SMS principles and build in more redundancies and operate with that sense of humility all the time.
Can I add one thing? Just and it's not just on operators. I mean, I have to tell you, out of East Palestine, I was not happy with how the federal government responded. I mean, I'm not talking from an NTSB perspective. There was a lot of talk, and it was, there's nothing to see here. What you're experiencing is not real. Yes, you might be coughing. Yes, you might have a sore throat. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. That was the message received, right? And then it was parts per million, parts per million, parts per million. That's not even English to people, right? I mean, come on. Learn how to talk with people, listen. So, you know, when I saw what was going on, I decided right away, you know, we were going to go there. We were going to have our hearings there. We were going to have our board meeting there. And, you know, that the NTSB, if there was one agency, that we were going to sit there at every community meeting, I think we had 4 of them, and we were going to answer every question until there were no questions being asked. We were going to listen. I would be yelled at. That's fine. That's okay. Everybody has a different response to a tragedy, right? People crying, that's okay, of course. But it was our duty to be there and to listen until no one had anything else to share. But just talk, you know, how the federal government response to matters. Even more so because the communities are looking for help afterwards. They feel like, oh, hey, you know, a train it just blew up in the middle of my town. Who's here to help me? If it's not you, who else is it? Right? So I just wanted to share that. It's not just on the operators.
You know, a little bit to that, you know, I think it's a struggle across various hazardous materials transportation, including pipelines. It's difficult to communicate risk, and it's difficult to communicate after there's been a failure. And one thing that the Pipeline Safety Trust has been pushing for is PHMSA's R&D program funds a lot of things around really technical engineering topics such as stress corrosion cracking and really specific things like that, which is of course important. We would love to see some of that funding go to more of the social science around communication, about risk, and about communicating risk in these, you know, low probability but high impact kind of industries such as pipelines.
Mm-hmm. I can see the value in it, yeah. And I think, in just sort of referencing my earlier remarks of explaining how that is good in reducing liability and improving safety and protecting the public. I mean, I think there are myriad benefits to doing that in addition to the really important research work that we do.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, one of the most recent developments so many of us in this room are involved in within the pipeline space is the potential build out of carbon dioxide and hydrogen pipelines. These would be entering a world where there could be this rapid expansion with underdeveloped research, insufficient safety regulations, in some cases deeply insufficient safety regulations. For operators looking to expand in this and participate in this expansion and would be much closer to people and communities than it has been in the past, what advice do each of you have to ensure that the desire for innovation doesn't overtake safety?
I'm going to start.
Go ahead.
So I think always, you know, that must be top of mind. I'll just say to sort of your earlier comments, you know, our top career official, Alan Maybury, wrote to the heads of each of the CO2 pipeline developers saying, we have authority to ensure safety even if it's not in a regulation. And we are, folks are probably aware that we are working diligently to propose the strongest standards for CO2 pipelines in the world and to address every fundamental flaw in the Satarsha, Mississippi incident from 2020 in that rulemaking. And so I think ultimately it is going through that process and ensuring and getting your public comments. That's what's going to ensure we are not sacrificing safety for, did you say safety for innovation?
For innovation, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say I always hear entities say safety is a priority. Safety is a priority. Safety is a core value. It's not a priority. It's not one of your priorities. It's a core value. So we certainly need innovation. We have to have that. We have to look at new technologies, new ways of moving dangerous goods overall. Because there are opportunities to improve safety, but we do have to do that in a way that makes safety the core value over innovation. And part of that, and we'll get into this, I think, is through safety management. It's not just in what exists today, but how you pursue development of new pipelines or development of transporting dangerous goods, new ways of doing that, and focusing on looking at where your highest risk areas or your risk is and addressing that risk and proactively monitoring improvements that you put in place. So I do think that is part of dealing with change in new technologies.
Chair Homendy, you mentioned the meeting in Jackson, Mississippi. You both attended, I believe, that meeting with Congressman Thompson and Atmos Energy. That was awful. There was multiple two home explosions in a short amount of time, and in a community in Jackson. One person was killed, another was injured. Several homes were destroyed. The entire community was on edge. I know we heard from a lot of members of the community at Pipeline Safety Trust. They called, just completely lost trust and were scared, rightfully so. What lessons did each of you take away from that meeting?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, the community had a lot of questions, rightfully so. And a lot of people didn't even realize there was a pipeline there. I think we have to really think about how we communicate with individuals where pipelines are, where neighborhoods are, where people are living, where they're working. I think at some point it was putting something, in the mail. I don't think many people don't get bills anymore. They get things online. How do you get messages out? I will say I live in a neighborhood. It's in a somewhat rural area, and we have a pipeline going through at the front of the neighborhood, and I have to believe every couple of weeks the landscapers pull out all the all the signage and the markings, and then I go and tell them they got to put it back. I mean, I am like the worst person to be in this neighborhood. Right? I mean, it is actually pretty bad. I mean, when I moved in, I had to call Columbia Gas to say, is there an excess flow valve on this house? How do you know what that is? But no, seriously, it's how we communicate with where people are living and working to tell them what's there, how to be safe, why it matters that you call 811. What happens when there is a problem. And I think that constant communication, but that is something that doesn't exist in a lot of communities, and that's a problem. And it's not just for who's living and working, but it's for the responders. If you just think about around the 1980s, we had about, in the US, 11 million 911 calls annually. Today, it's 38 million 911 calls annually. Meanwhile, career firefighters the levels are about the same. Volunteer is down about 25%. So you're talking about less people who are responding with a significant increase in 911 calls. And so when you're having a lot of 911 calls on, hey, I smell gas, can somebody check it out? We also have to be talking to fire departments, especially volunteer, to really, how do you respond? Are you trained? Do you have the information you need? So those were the two things I really took away from it.
To me, it was another incident where there were a lot of questions for the company, and the company had not communicated the information that the public was demanding and desiring. And I think of going down to visit with community members in Freeport who just simply wanted to know, were there emissions that they were affected by, just the basics of what happened and what risks remain out there. I don't think it's too much to ask when a failure occurs that a company post up on the internet, ask me anything, virtual town hall, in person. We've stood in many instances when the companies haven't done that, where we just not only do we answer all the questions in person or virtually, and then leave open for weeks. If you have follow-up questions, send us all your questions, and then we will respond and post all the answers online so everybody can see and read the questions and answers that their fellow community members have and get the same access to information. That's a burden for our team that is also trying to write rules and enforce them, and it's in many cases the same team doing all those things. And really, I think that's where industry can step up and would be to the benefit of industry to do that.
I have to say, though, if you're industry and you're waiting until a tragedy occurs to do that, you are way too late. You should be developing that. You should just assume you're going to have an incident at some point. And you should be actively developing that relationship from the start. Is everybody going to love you? Nope. But don't just send them a little thing in the mail or just assume they know. You have to be actively developing that relationship with communities, not waiting. So.
And I'll take that as an opportunity to promote API's recommended practice 1185 on public engagement. We're really happy to see and thankful for all the hard work. A lot of the working group on that is here in the room, and we're excited to see how that develops. After the 2019 Enbridge natural gas transmission pipeline rupture and explosion in Danville, Kentucky, which killed 1 person and injured 6. That was the latest in a series of incidents that the NTSB had identified a problem, potential problem with the way PHMSA calculates the potential impact radius. And there's been a recommendation for PHMSA to revise that methodology. Chair Homendy, can you talk a bit more about the history of that recommendation and the findings of the investigations? Yeah,
so our recommendation, I mean, the history on potential impact radius for the NTSB, I mean, really goes back to Carlsbad, 2000. And I went back and looked for Carlsbad and 12 fatalities again. You know, we looked, the 12 fatalities, 675 feet, but the potential impact radius was calculated at 598 feet. San Bruno, 2010, damaged homes were 600 feet, potential impact radius calculated at 414 feet. Sissonville, 2012, damaged 610 feet, but the potential impact radius was 567 feet. Danville, of course, with 1 fatality and 6 injured. 1 person that was found dead was 640 feet. Homes were damaged 1,100 feet, but the potential impact radius was 633 feet. And why that matters is the types of safety measures and emergency protocols that will be put in place by the operators. But the potential impact radius is calculated in a way that basically assumes that individuals will make a decision within 5 seconds to run at about 5 miles per hour for 25 seconds and find a place to find shelter within 200 feet. Good luck if they are, seriously, I mean, if you're elderly, if you're a child, if you're sleeping, I mean, how do you do that? I mean, even if you're awake, it takes, 3 or 4 seconds to just sort of process what just happened and then act. So we have been recommending repeatedly that PHMSA look at how that's calculated and make change.
Yeah, and we've embraced that recommendation. We do have a working group working on it. Obviously, it is there's a lot of science and data that goes into that. So fortunately, we've got a great team working on it. And I think it is critical to get that number right and to factor in the things that the chair mentioned.
How large of a role do each of you think that safety management systems will play in the future of pipeline safety? A recent API survey showed only 22% of operators have committed to SMS. And so would you say it is time to consider incorporating 1173 into regulations?
I'm going to be a little bit unpopular here. I actually am a little bit concerned about putting it in regulation because I think it would take years. I think we can't wait to put a regulation together. I think what we need is to get the industry to move on pipeline safety in a voluntary way. It's more immediate. So I know that's probably a surprise to a lot of people, but what I don't want is for operators to wait. Safety management, it is looking, across your operations. If you're not familiar with it, think about the airlines. So our commercial aviation, we had numerous crashes, if you think about the 70s and 80s and 90s. And now we have safety management systems throughout aviation. I'm not talking about the manufacturers, because the manufacturers are just starting with safety management. I'm talking about the operators. When you think about, you get on your plane, United, Delta, and others. They have safety management systems. Alaska was the first to adopt it, where they proactively address risk. They look at throughout their operations, where's our risk? How do we proactively address that risk, put measures in place, and then continually evaluate and reevaluate those safety mitigations so to see if they are doing what was anticipated. A part of that also is non-punitive reporting, so that they take those reports and that the regulator, the airline carrier, and the union gets together to look at all those reports and figure out, okay, what happened here, how do we address safety? That feeds into their safety management system. I will say also key to safety management is safety culture. We're seeing that with our Boeing investigation. You have to have, as part of safety management, a safety culture that is informed, meaning you're taking in information, and then reporting that safety information out to your personnel. That's a learning culture. You're learning from not just your own tragedy, but others, or any sort of research information coming in, that you have a reporting culture, that you're actively promoting, reporting, within your operations of near miss or a potential safety issue, and that once you get those reports, which must be, by the way, the other part of it is just culture, so when something does happen, you're not punished, but that is proactively addressed through action. But part of that reporting culture and just culture is then taking that information that came in, that safety issue that was reported, and then actively telling your employees, this is how we're going to address it. See, we made change. Please continue reporting. So that is all part of safety management. That's a very quick summary, but it helped. This was key to getting from plane crashes on the regular to having virtually no fatalities in commercial aviation over the last 15 years. Which is a significant success. That's why I believe zero is possible, but it's through the success of SMS. So I do think there are some opportunities to bring together, and we had actually planned this, and then COVID happened, a roundtable with the nuclear industry and with, because that's really where it started, and aviation and pipelines to bring everybody together and think about and talk about lessons learned, how has it benefited, other industries, that sharing of information. And we actually do hope to do that in 2025. I'm hoping to bring that together, and we're working with the whole team is working on that now. But I do think that a regulation would just delay it.
One follow-up before we move up to...
You might have a different view, though. No.
I'm just curious, after it's been 10 years, and it's been what I consider a slower adoption than we'd like to see, so how do we speed up the adoption?
I think we have to, that's part of what we want to do by getting different industries together to try to show this is how it has benefited the other industries, not just in less incidents, lower fatalities, lower injuries, but also how it's benefited them from a cost perspective as well, an economic perspective, which I think is something that everyone could benefit from learning about. But getting everyone together, I think buy-in is really needed here.
Couldn't agree more, and really just everything you said. We regulate 3,000 pipeline operators directly or indirectly, and some of them have thousands of employees, and some of them have one, and the value is going to be different, and the approach is going to be vastly different. I think we all agree. I think everybody agrees, or just about everybody in the room, there is value to the safety management principles and process, how you apply it, and there are some trades that are working on toolkits for their members to try to bring people into that fold. So there is progress being made. We're not where we want to be, and I think it's worth discussing. How can we push, mandate, instigate more adoption? But a blanket mandate without a lot of thinking it through, and how's that going to work, and is that going to be effective and or distract from other really important mandates too? Those are questions we'd have to work through.
Last question before we move on to the audience is the goal of zero incidents. We talk about it a lot. Do you see this as more of an aspirational goal, or is it truly attainable?
I think it's attainable. I think it definitely has to be the goal. It has to be. I mean, I hear a lot of people who always say, "Oh, I think zero is a pipe dream." What would be better? Should we say, half of the 17 who died is the goal? No, because that means 8 or 9 people died. That's not acceptable for us. So, zero is attainable. We've learned that from aviation. I think I just said, I think the success there has been SMS and the reporting program ASAP that exists for the airlines, voluntary safety reporting. But, I do think that that's possible with that.
Yeah, I again would echo my dear friend and colleagues' comments, but I'd really like to hear what industry has to say on that question, and in particular after an incident, and really reassessing their own outlook. I gave an example of one company that was very proud of no incidents in 10 years until their facility blew up. Mm-hmm. So I think those to me are the most valuable moments, that time of humility and really embracing risk, which should be all of the time. And I think it's an important question, though.
I will say, and for operators, don't assume it won't happen to you on the 10-year thing. The operators, at least on the aviation side, do a lot of drills. So I'm getting calls all the time from, a CEO or somebody of one of the airlines saying, it's just a drill, no problem here. But I don't get that. I get that occasionally from the railroads, but not from the pipeline. So I hope you all are doing that and preparing, because I would just assume at some point that will happen.
Let's move on to some audience questions. Do we have some mics available?
Hi. I'm Jess Conard. I am from East Palestine, Ohio. Thank you so much for including it in your discussion today. The United States Environmental Protection Agency has an authority to conduct a risk assessment and rulemaking for toxic chemicals. This is under the Toxic Substance Control Act. Currently, vinyl chloride, which was spilled in my community, is undergoing a risk assessment. What are your thoughts on the EPA deciding not to include transportation and distribution and commerce, as it is currently regulated, in their assessment of this chemical? And does PHMSA think this is important for the EPA to include it? Why or why not? And will you work with the EPA to include this in their assessment and rulemaking process to prevent something like what happened in my community?
I'll just be perfectly honest. I don't have a full understanding of that process. I can honestly say, the more information we have about risk to communities as our agency, the better we are able to help protect communities. So Without having the knowledge that it sounds like you have, more information the better. I'm glad to follow up to try to be better educated on that and how our agency might benefit from that. So thank you for flagging it. If you have any, yeah.
Next question.
Hi, Lois Epstein. I'm on the board of the Pipeline Safety Trust, and thank you both for coming to the Trust Conference and having this discussion today. So I want to go back to the final topic you were talking about whether SMS, the safety management system, should be mandatory or not. And I'm wondering, Chair Homendy, whether both things can be happening at once. Maybe you can have the roundtable to encourage every operator to move forward quickly, but also work towards mandatory, because we know there's going to be some part of the industry, unless they're required to do it, won't do it. And I do a lot of work on the offshore, and there is an equivalent to safety management system there. We all probably remember Deepwater Horizon, especially folks from the Gulf area. There hasn't been a huge major incident since then. And right after Deepwater Horizon happened, the equivalent of the safety management system was made mandatory. So I'd love to have you both comment on that. Thank you.
I mean, we're certainly not, opposed if PHMSA wants to pursue a regulation, but I do think the most effective way right now is to get industry buy-in to adopt it voluntarily. I don't want, and while I understand there are certainly models out there, what I don't want to see is entities not do it waiting for the regulation to come. They have to now, and I do worry that they won't. So I do think working with the operators to move them towards safety management, as we did with the air carriers who did adopt it voluntarily initially, I think it's important.
Yeah, and I would just add, it's just simply how you do it, how you get people to want to get value from a mandate or regulation. There's a great book by Cynthia Giles, who's former associate administrator at the EPA for Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, about writing elegant rules that get the desired results. You can have the most sort of ambitious and thoughtful goal and requirement, but in terms of the implementation, if it's not there, now all of a sudden, you might not be achieving the results you want because of how it's being implemented. Or somebody just says, oh, I'm checking the box here. I've done it. I've met the requirements of the rule. So to me, it's really just about how it's done. So whether it's a mandate or something else, it's really just about how.
Yeah, I will say that for Coast Guard, they have SMS rules for, say, large cargo ships or cruise ships, and their regulations are geared towards just compliance with minimum safety standards. It's not the SMS that we see in aviation. It's significantly different, much lower. So I would like to, I think we can pursue a lot through a lot of work together.
Hello, I'm Irene Leach, and I live in the area where the Mountain Valley Pipeline has just been put into service. And my question is, how do we get the folks who are involved to listen instead of automatically dismissing the public and our concerns? We have now had 2 annual safety trainings in our community. You have to be invited. You have to know it's happening to ask to be invited. It's not truly public. The first responders haven't been coming. And they don't address what we need in our community. They're cookie cutter, and they're not dealing with the fact that what we have is transmission that doesn't include odor, and the people around are already thinking that we don't have pipelines around. There's, nothing to be concerned about. And so the information that people really need is not going out. And how do we get that to happen so that there can be a safety culture in our community and protect our community?
Well, it's good to see you again. I didn't include my visit, I think, to your community in my list of visits that it, really was instigated by you and folks in this room. So thank you for having me. And in terms of your question of how do you get, and I think the chair also is trying to emphasize, to the industry representatives in this room that you need to do that community outreach and communication before incidents. You need to include certainly first responders. I mean, everything you asked for sounds pretty thoughtful and reasonable, right? And so if you feel like you're not getting what needs to happen in your specific community, talking to the company I think is good first, which I know you've definitely done. I think you've also talked to your member of Congress, because I've heard from them, multiple members. I would really encourage you to keep doing what you're doing until you get the basics of what you're asking for, which I think is making sure you understand the risks and how to deal with them, particularly the first responders, who are the ones who are going to be responding to some type of risk. So we will continue to be helpful in how we can be helpful as well.
Hello, my name is Maury Johnson. I'm also impacted by the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Before I begin, I want to say something that I said in Washington State in June to the Pipeline Safety Trust 25th anniversary. Thank you, Bellingham, for doing this important work. If you ever get a chance to go to Bellingham, you need to go and see the displays and stuff. Also want to say that our late friend, Irene of mine, Bill Limpert, who passed away, a retired Maryland regulator, really got me involved in the thoughts of pipe safety. And Tristan, you probably knew him pretty well. I want to thank the Pipeline Safety Trust, PHMSA, NTSB for the work you've done. I have a real concern. Some pipeline developers do not care about pipe safety. That's from my experience. Some do. I'm sure that some of you do. I'm not putting everybody in the same basket. I have monitored Mountain Valley Pipeline and other pipelines in the region for 4 years. I see shortcuts taken. One of the big issues, and I'll talk to y'all more about it, we got in, and Bill Limpert helped bring us to the forefront, is pipe coating issues. And I've been noticing it's now all across West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, places I go. The way that pipeline companies handle excess pipe or stored pipe, maybe it's just a few pieces to thousands of pieces, from the information I've learned, is bizarre. And we need to have a serious talk about that across the industry. I don't know if that's something that's on your all's radar, but it needs to be, and I'll be talking about it in the sighting later. But thank you all, PHMSA people that I've worked with, for listening to us. We've pushed you pretty hard, and we're going to continue to. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for the thanks. Those thanks go a long way.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Hello, Doug Krogost. I'm Standing Rock Sioux Tribal Water Resources Director for the past 10 years. I'm a tribal member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. I'd like to thank Dakota Access Pipeline for allowing me to be an expert on pipeline safety today. So if Enbridge is in the house, Kelsey Warren, thank you. Indian country is huge in the United States. We're new to pipeline development. We're new to safety, and I am not an expert. but I've become an expert over the past, 9 years. Indian country in the United States is been explored for hundreds of years, and then now we're looking at how do we protect Indian country. Indian country are sovereign nations that are separate than states, and so we know that, and we try to protect that. The sovereign nations of our people and my relatives are thousands of years we've been doing it, and we're still doing it to this day. These regulations are new, you're new, all this is new, and we're trying to figure out what's the relationship for Native country, Indian country, pipeline safety, and these big, vast companies that are coming in and looking at how the land, the resources are underdeveloped, but let's develop through them because the regulations are not really there. And so transparency is huge with me because I am going to be the first responder to a pipeline spill or a railroad spill or a break in Indian country. And Standing Rock and Cheyenne River together, we're the size of most states. But yet we lack the resources and the emergency management practices and to address it. So when we go to DC, when we go to the Army Corps, we ask other government officials, help us. Just help us. Help us understand what's going on, because we don't have the deep pockets. We don't have the regulations. We don't have the rules that the United States has, because as a sovereign nation, we create our own. So the relationship that we have is very limited, and companies see that, and they railroad through our lands. So we ask for the government agencies, help us. And so we don't really see that help. We don't. And I'll be honest with you, I go to DC occasionally, and we ask for help with our tribal leaders, and we don't get that help. We don't see that help. My question, I guess if it's a question, and I do have trauma, but I don't want to bring that here because I'll talk about that later on in a breakout. What are we doing to help Indian country? What are you guys doing to help Native country? The first people that are still here, that's been here for thousands of years, and then now, how are we helping continue to have the first people of this nation continue to be the first people? And a lot of us here are tribal members, somehow, Cherokees, I'm sure they're here. But how are we protecting Indian country? And that's my question.
Yeah. I share a few things that we've done in the last few years. Our first ever infrastructure grant to a tribal community. And actually, that was earlier this year that we were able to make that award. And then we have subsequently made our second as well. I think we've talked about emergency preparedness and being ready and understanding, doing exercises. We've invited, I believe, your tribe to those exercises in the past. I can reference a few more things that we've done, but to your point, it's not enough. It is not nearly enough. We have a team of about a dozen community liaisons on the pipeline side of our agency, and we have focused our limited resources, a dozen people for 330 million Americans, on underserved communities. Who's been historically not getting the outreach from our teams, and how can we help fill that gap? It's a pretty big gap, and 12 people is not going to cut it, but I know that's something the Pipeline Safety Trust has advocated for. So I'm glad to share more about what we have done and what we're doing, but I think what's most important is continuing to hear what you think we need to be doing and that informs our work. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Chair Homendy. Thank you, Deputy Administrator Brown. Really appreciate you being here and adding to the conversation.